everyone, welcome to Startup Central. I'm Nayantara Rai. Today I'm coming to you from a co-works in New Delhi, and the idea being here is to get you a special interview with the founders of Setu as well as their investor Lightspeed. The three of you, thanks so much for joining us here. Harsha, Sahil and Nikhil, thanks a lot for being part of Startup Central. Setu making a lot of buzz when it comes to fintech. You guys are really young. I leave it to you. How did you both come together? How did Setu start? Which one of you wants to take this?
I'll take it. No, we were very lucky in the sense that we got introduced to each other by Nandan.
Nandan Nilekani.
Yes, in about 3.5 years ago. I was part of the early team at Aadhaar. Nikhil had just kind of gotten involved with India Stack to work on UPI. And then he got us in a room and said something that only Nandan can say, which is you two should put together a plan and work with the team to get UPI to 100 million users. And at that point...
And you both had never met before. There was Nandan Nilekani who thought that both of you would work well together.
Yes. We hadn't met before.
Sahil was a VC, so there was no reason to see him.
So he was a really entrepreneurial guy. I had been an entrepreneur in a past life, and I was a VC at that time. And when we got introduced, and he said 100 million users, at that point UPI wasn't even launched. It was just about to launch.
Okay.
And so 100 million seemed like a big number, and that too in 18 months. So he said 100 million in 18 months was what we were kind of shooting for. And we just looked at each other.
And it was just like two random guys sitting in an office in Bangalore and
he locked you both up in a room?
No, he wasn't there. He actually introduced, and Sahil and I spoke on the phone, and I went to Sahil's office. A similar whiteboard I remember, where I basically put out all the things that I knew about, the ecosystem, what was happening and so on. And then I still remember people actually called us crazy because, thinking about trying to build an ecosystem of 100 million consumers going digital. Remember we took like 20 years to get like 10 to 15 million people to actually use mobile banking. Yeah. So here we were talking about 10% of the population in 18 months. So people thought we were really crazy when we said that we have a plan for taking UPI to 100 million. And we got lucky, really lucky.
And we worked with some amazing people. Look, it couldn't have happened without NPCI, without all the banks, without everyone coming together and collaborating as an ecosystem. We were just servants of this entire ecosystem and kind of...
Servants of the state.
Servants of the state. In the sense that we don't necessarily serve any particular dispensation, but India as a whole, we always... I've had the good fortune of working for Aadhaar 9 years ago when it was just launched. In fact, I joined 1 month before the first Aadhaar number was issued. And building public infrastructure at a national scale, digital infrastructure for India, it really has been the greatest calling of both our lives. It's been such a wonderful experience being involved in building of Aadhaar, of UPI, of eKYC, DigiLocker, all of these systems that have only come up in the last 3.5 years. We've had the good fortune of being involved in playing a small role in taking that forward. And that for us really became this is what we want to do for the rest of our lives, build digital infrastructure to make the movement of money and data easier. And so when, a year ago...
So it was in that room that you both figured out what the problem was that you wanted to solve, or...?
Not really. The last 3.5 years kind of was a foundational reset. We came from technology backgrounds and, engineering, startups. And if you've always looked at technology as a way of creating value for businesses, right? So you would build software as an entrepreneur to solve business problems and so on. And there was this foundational reset that happened to us in the last 3-4 years that, you can actually build impactful technology that changes people's lives. When I walk out now and see that every small shop is using a UPI QR, that's the reckoning. It basically shows, 3 years ago it was a dream, but today, millions of businesses, millions of consumers using this. So this foundational reset of thinking about using technology for societal change, for bringing good to people, that reset or that idea is what brought us together.
And for that reset to happen, Harsha at Lightspeed is of course playing a very big role. You're providing the money for that. But first, if I could ask you, Did Nandan Nilekani play a role in you finding Setu and these two guys in the room, or did you do that on your own, which is of course your job?
No, I think we'll take all the credit for this. I'm kidding. No, to be honest, it's part of our job to sort of keep, understand what's going on in the industry, sort of stay up to date, right? And Sahil was an investor before, and he was like really sort of the Bharat guy who understood what was going on in the rest of India, right? I mean, most of us that live in tier 1 are in a bubble, but the rest of India is a different story. And so he was like the guy who really understood what a common man.
So you at Lightspeed used to go to him to understand?
Yeah, we
pick his
would.
brains?
I think sort of talking to experts, understanding, sort of just building on your knowledge is part of the job, and that's what we did. He was the man we would talk to about Bharat, right? And Nikhil was our payments UPI guy. He's the guy we would talk to about regulatory changes, what's going on, just knowledge sharing. And sort of the day, I think, as a fund, we started to believe, given all the changes that were happening in the regulatory environment, that fintech or financial services in India they were going to go through a major shift, right? Whether it is on lending, whether it's insurance, wealth, or payments for that matter, right? And so the day I spoke to Sahil and then Nikhil, and then sort of they mentioned what their grand vision was, which is they believed that every company can be a fintech company, right? Yeah. If we just build the right infrastructure to make it happen. And that just clicked immediately for us, right? And from that day, we were all over them. So essentially that's what happened. We're like, we're investing, come to us.
So was you chasing them as maybe?
Definitely, I think everybody was chasing them, but I think we just chased faster. That's basically.
Is that what happened? That Harsha was quicker than the rest, not because she's the best.
No. I want to make this. I want to lay this. This because she was the best. Both Harsha and her partner Bejul are someone that we've known very well, and both of them have a deep appreciation not just for the macro and the sector and understanding fintech and in general, but also. I feel like one of the most important parts of being an investor is understanding the emotional side of entrepreneurship, having that emotional intelligence to know what the founder's true vision is, how they can be supported through the journey. And they really have this attitude of not being evaluative but being supportive and having a very high emotional intelligence for how to play the game of entrepreneurship. And so that's something that we really kind of were attracted to.
In fact, I'd say that, I think investors like these inspire entrepreneurs to do more. I would probably say there are so many of us sitting on the fence because entrepreneurship is hard, entrepreneurship is difficult, it's intimidating.
It's lonely.
It's lonely, but when we met Harsha and Bejul, we actually didn't take too much time to decide.
How long did you guys take?
We took the term sheet the day it was offered.
So it was
you guys got together in one day and figured out you have to work together.
So we had been in touch for a while.
As in we've known each other.
No, I meant the two of them were locked up literally in a room by Nandan and they decided to work
that was
together.
3.5 years before.
Okay.
We first met 3.5 years before. We worked on a bunch of stuff together. He was working on Bheem. He led the team that got Bheem built in the days after demonetization. We worked together on a bunch of other measures. So for 3 years we had worked together on India Stack, which are these, eKYC, DigiLocker,
Are you profiling
UPI.
us?
All of
yeah.
No.
I mean, no.
We have been already.
We're empowering people, at least that we're working to. We hope to empower people. When you build a metro, you don't talk about what would happen if the metro went off the rail, right? You talk about how many people you can move.
Apples, oranges.
No, it's infrastructure. It is not. See, this is something that I wanted to kind of specify. Who are our heroes? For us, we are engineers. Our heroes are Vishweshwaraya. Our heroes are Ishridharan, the man who built the metro. Yeah. Our heroes are Nandan Nilekani, people who built infrastructure that hundreds of millions of people, hundreds of millions of people use on a daily basis. Kubitschek, who was a president of Brazil, once said that to govern is to build roads. Right? We are building roads. This infrastructure for the movement of data and money are the roads of tomorrow. And so building that public infrastructure is what we are really passionate about in that sense.
I think just to sort of put this in context, so they've known each other for a while. We'd been in touch as well with both of them. At some point they started thinking of building something together, right? And that was like the genesis of Setu.
This is about 3 years after we met.
This is after 3 years.
This is last year.
sort of the idea behind Setu, and actually I should let you guys explain this, but I'll just tell you from my perspective, the idea behind Setu, or at least the way we see it, is, it's really sort of the bridge that connects banking or transactional infrastructure with companies that intend to use this infrastructure in innovative ways on their own, right? Today, you're limited to doing what is offered by the banks, for instance, right? But if we could sort
Take
of
the bank
break
to
it
the-
down
yeah.
into individual pieces that people can then plug and play the way they like, and of course, conforming to regulatory norms, then we could innovate very interesting products, right? Essentially, that was the idea which resonated with us, because we believed that more and more companies would want to innovate on financial products. And as an example of that, I think a couple of years ago, when sort of Ola, for their, for each ride, launched an insurance product. So when you book an Ola ride, you could pay like ₹1 to insure that ride.
Correct.
Right? This is like, if you're doing 1 million rides a day, that's 1 million insurance products manufactured per day.
Correct.
Right? That pace is something else, right? That pace is what a lot of companies have not seen. That product, which is a runtime product, is something that a lot of folks have not thought of, right? But Ola did and Acco did, and the reason they could do it was because the technology layer existed to make it happen. But that doesn't exist for all products. The idea behind Setu was to make that layer available to more companies, right?
And because you have worked where you have worked, you know what that missing layer is, I would imagine.
Yes, in the sense that, there are two parts to this. One is to think about it like, where do we want to go from here? In India, we have achieved so much with these public platforms. So now it's the right time to innovation to kick off on top of this. So we have a digital KYC infrastructure in the country. We have a digital payments infrastructure in the country. So now it's really about like, how do we create a thriving innovation ecosystem on top of it, so that financial services or banking experience can be personalized to people. So imagine, what if people built bank accounts for children? What if people could now build a banking experience for the elderly? What if people could build banking experience for people with special needs and
Let's
so
put
on?
it this way, right? It's hubris to believe that there can be one company that will serve all of India. There are literally thousands of Indias, right? The life of a farmer and his cash flow cycle is very different from the life of a steel trader, which is very different from someone who runs a textile mill, that from a teacher. Their financial lives are very different from each other. And then, of course, there are other types of diversity, like linguistic diversity. We have 25 languages that are spoken by at least 1 million people. So building those experiences that are right for them on their phone, and these are all
So
people.
there's so much that can be covered. You
Yes.
want to tell me what Setu is starting with? Because literally the world is your oyster at the moment, right?
So what we are doing is, all these cohorts of people that we spoke about are served by some app or some company or the other, right? I mean, if you have a cohort, for example, who do driving for a living, Ola, for example, is a company that serves them very well on a daily basis.
I like how she plugged in Ola and the village. She thinks I didn't notice it, but I did.
I think Harsha still holds Ola stocks.
I'm ready for the Oyo one to come up. I'm ready for the Oyo one to come up with.
And the next example was going to be Oyo for Nutella. No, but these are all companies that serve certain cohorts very well, and they understand their needs, the cohort's needs, the people's needs very well. So instead of expecting this cohort to go to the bank or to a lender or to an insurance company, can they embed themselves into the application like an Ola or Oyo, where they're already interacting every day, right? So what that means is, if I need a loan, the best person for me to actually get a loan is someone who I transact with on a daily basis. Technically, your Kirana shop is actually giving you a loan for you to buy your goods.
Yeah, right? You clear the dues once a week or something.
Exactly. And the same goes for any business who's run a business on credit. So when you're supplying, you're actually extending a loan along with supplying material. So actually every company is already a financial services company. Now, can we make them a fintech company by connecting them to banks? Because their cost of capital, when you're giving that loan, it costs them money. They can't buy something and they're not getting interest.
Time is money, yeah.
Exactly. They're not getting interest for that. The same goes for an insurance product. So can we
So
get?
you're gonna basically institutionalize that.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And
So
formalize
if we
that.
connect businesses
So
to
I'll have to pay my kirana guy interest too, just to ask you, because after
No,
you're
not necessarily.
institutionalizing the system.
no,
I'm putting it very simply.
there are two ways. One, you can pay your kirana shop guy at the comfort from your house, so you don't have to give him cash anymore. So that's one way of looking at it. The second is, how do you make the kirana shop more efficient by making capital available to him from a formal financial institution, right? Because he has, if you connect businesses with formal finance, then you see magic happen, because you're able to get formal finance, low capital injected into the economy.
Why? Because it's cheaper. Formal finance is always
Cheaper,
cheaper than informal credit, right? And same goes for, you don't have informal insurance per se, so you need formal connections to get insurance products. And so all of banking and financial services needs to embed
But
itself closer to the customer.
But it sounds fantastic. It sounds really great. You're going to need the regulators to keep pace with this.
Yes.
We're talking at a time where look what's happening with NBFCs. Look what's happening in the banking space. There's literally no credit offtake which is taking place, and you're trying to revolutionize a space which is, if I may say so, not doing well or is in shambles at the moment. How is that not a problem for you guys?
I think regulation. There is a reason why regulation exists in this
But it has to
industry.
keep pace too.
Absolutely. So
I
there
actually
is.
feel that Indian regulation is keeping more
It's-
at pace than
right.
anywhere in
So
the world.
I keep joking that there are entrepreneurs today. When we wake up, we don't know whether our business is how it's going to impact. Right. So like the regulations in India are not just anymore with circulars and MPC meetings.
Yeah.
It's also law that's being changed.
Correct.
So there's a lot of action that's happening. But if you look at it, the government is doing this with a central theme in mind, and the theme is to to make digitization happen, to bring more people into the formal finance economy. So as entrepreneurs, it's very important for us, when we get into this line of business, to be aware that this is going to be a volatile regulatory environment. Design our people, process, platform in a way that we are able to withstand and adapt to these changing So let me give you a great example of how regulation will help somebody like this. So let's take RBI sandbox as an example. After so many years, it's actually a moment of
Governor and the RBI talking about
right. So
sandbox regulation.
it's actually something that we should all be celebrating, right? And to say, hey, look, the regulator of the country is inviting us to say, guys, these are the top 8 to 10 themes, come and innovate on top of this. And if those goes well, it's a clearly laid out path on how can you get started as a payment system operator, or whether you want to operate as a virtual bank, and so on. So I think we have good intentions on the regulatory side. As an industry,
In fact, there's just been a panel on fintech, which is submitted a report,
absolutely.
right?
So the SC Garg report on virtual banking that came out, if you talk about the NBFC AA account aggregator regulations, it's going to be a huge thing. It's going to open up credit and financial services in this country massively. You see RBI's vision document that they put forward for payment systems, the Nilekani committee report that came out recently. We're talking about the sandbox that came out both from the RBI and from SEBI.
SEBI as a
Don't forget data
sandbox.
privacy as well.
And the data privacy.
Then the data privacy
So
bill.
the argument could be made that the regulators, more than doing a job, not just keeping pace, but pushing the ecosystem forward in a sense by creating frameworks that entrepreneurs can kind of build into. And so for us, I'll tell you one of my favorite stories when it comes to when I was a kid and I was learning, I had the good fortune of learning fielding from Shivaram Krishnan, who had come to Mangalore for a little bit. He was a good close infielder. And he said, the difference between a good fielder and a great fielder? Everybody gave answers about, is it reflexes, is it this? He said, no. The difference is that a great fielder wants the ball to come to him. Right? So same
I
goes.
thought it was a great fielder, the one who's staying awake through
No,
all the overs and not missing.
They want the ball, every ball, they want the ball to come to them. So for us as entrepreneurs, particularly in the financial services space, we want regulation, because regulation is what gives us certainty over our business. When there's no regulatory cover, you never know what might happen. So the fact that the regulators being so proactive is something that is very heartening for
What's
us.
fascinating, Harsha, and tell me if I'm wrong here. For me, it's fascinating that you have these young entrepreneurs who are saying we want regulations, whereas a big industry, the blue chip companies, say we don't want regulations. Do you see that dichotomy?
I actually see it, and and if I map it to my past world, I was at Ola before I moved on to Lightspeed, and I remember early days at Ola, right? the format in which Ola operated was actually not regulated. And it was something that the consumer wanted. From a supply side, it brought in more earnings for drivers. They wanted it. But because there was no regulation, expansion was a problem, right?
Yeah.
And in every state, you had to talk to the regulator.
And every state, but turn by turn, wanted to ban it.
Yeah.
And, you know.
And it went through all of that cycle. I think it's fascinating that, you know, for once we probably have an environment where, at least in fintech, we will not be wondering what the regulator will do, because I actually strongly believe that in this case the regulator is keeping up with what startups need, what the consumer needs, and what it will take to truly create a digital India, right? And I think that the regulator is keeping up, it's keeping ahead, and is open, and I think that's super exciting.
Regulatory certainty is much better than regulatory uncertainty.
Or flip-flop for that matter.
Absolutely.
Because flip-flops also have been one of the big
Absolutely.
problems. Do you think they have great chemistry?
These two?
Yeah.
Oh, without a doubt. I sometimes it's annoying just how great that is. Like they have their own jokes, and like we'll be sitting in a board meeting not knowing what's going on. It's like they're just talking to each other.
Yeah.
Yeah, we also tend to talk to each other in Kannada, which annoys pretty much everybody.
Please don't turn into that in the language. I'm Punjabi, I don't understand a word of it. I won't be able to then have this conversation. How often do you talk to Harsha?
Oh, we talk every other week, and
Like a couple of times a week,
yeah, a couple
right?
of
Like,
times a week.
pick up the phone. Yeah.
and really it's more, you know, it's really like calling both a cross between a friend and a counselor, right? So you call and say this
You're a
is,
friend and a counselor.
Counselor-
Don't forget he said he's lonely
Counselor
also.
nahi socha tha maine. Like this makes.
He
like,
said he's lonely, remember?
entrepreneurship can be slightly maddening sometimes. The ups and downs, the variations in emotions can drive even the most sane people a little bit crazy. So
I
sometimes
have
you
to
need
ask
people
this
to
one
keep it.
question, and since I have founders and an investor together, so you know, you two are together, you get one investor, then you get other investors, then they will obviously picking up the phone and talking to those investors as well. How does the first one feel in those cases? Do you feel like you've been cheated on? Do you feel like, oh my God, there's someone else? Like, how do you deal with that? I've always wondered about this.
No. I actually.
You remember he's called you friend and counselor.
Yeah. See, that's never going to change. So I think that you know, I actually feel that every founder, and I think you guys would agree, right? Every founder actually thinks twice before bringing an investor on board. Yeah, I actually feel like these, you know, not to be boring about this, but I think these are relationships of trust.
Yes.
And I think that's okay. Like, it's okay if you're getting better
And I'm
advice
guessing
from
they would
somewhere
never
else.
get an investor on board that the existing investor would not be comfortable with.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, absolutely. Out of the question. See, I was an investor before this as well. I was in the VC business, and really, you know, the feeling that I had whenever somebody brought in, whenever an entrepreneur brought in another investor was one of overwhelming amount of pride, to be happy to see that, because usually they come in really early, right? And the company doesn't have much, and we're kind of building up as we go.
They buy back shares also sometimes.
Hey. But when another investor comes, it's like another milestone has been hit. They've grown
they're
up
proud
just
of
a little.
you or
So there's a
whatever.
feeling of pride, and then of course, you know, you don't bring in somebody into the family, so to speak, at
Yeah.
the table without everybody feeling like, yes, this is the right move. And so then it's not the founders bringing in another investor, it's all of us agreeing that we need to bring someone on board.
I think about this almost like a family, right? And you know, for
Having
some,
like another child, then. is that
yeah,
what you're
like
gonna say?
or even like a parent, right? And the last thing you want is an intimidating parent in the house. Like, you want somebody whom you can talk to openly about your
You're a
problems.
counselor and a parent.
I don't know what's going on today.
No, I'm just saying that, you know, one of the most important things for entrepreneurs to keep in mind is, you know, the reason is, you know, we started with this by, first was like we said, Harsha as a friend. You know, every time when we pick up the phone, you don't have this filter running in your mind on what do I share and what do I not share.
Yeah.
You know, so as far as you can have that kind of a natural instinct to call up and you don't have to think twice, whether it's
which
good
part of
news
this
or
can I
bad
tell?
news,
Yeah.
which part of this should I tell? So when that boundary is broken, then, you know, it is a family, right? And whether it's a parent-child relationship, whether it's, you know, whatever relationship,
Siblings.
I think the comfort
Counselor.
the comfort of the relationship can be measured by how much you're self-censoring.
It's-
If you're
it's-
not self-censoring,
Yeah, that's actually
So
true.
that's a good barometer then, I guess, to go back.
And whether when we add another investor, why would you want to get someone who spoils this, this equation that you have in the rooms, right? So it's a conscious. It's as much as our choice to bring the next investor. It's also their
I think
choice
you always
to
want like chemistry
Consensus.
around the board,
consensus
right?
on
Like
who
it's-
we
yeah.
work with together.
On that lovely note, I'd like to thank the three of you for joining us here to talk about what works for you guys and, of course, the future of fintech. Many thanks for joining
Thank
us.
you so
Thank you
much.
so much.
Thanks for having us.